welcome back, and hello everyone. I'm Janai Thornton, and so excited that you're back with us for another episode of Real Life, of course, brought to you by Thank Me Later. Again, so happy that you're here. And I have to admit, Real Life is one of my favorite series because this is where we prepare you for all of the real life situations that are going to happen. You can't stop life from happening, but you can certainly be prepared and equipped to navigate it. So this session, this one is a little interesting. Might be a little heavy, but necessary because, death happens in life. And I'm super grateful to have with us today Allie Murray McCray. Hey, Allie.
Hey, Janai.
I'm so happy that you're here. Allie Murray McCray is actually a funeral director. Can you believe, y'all? She's been a funeral director for 23 years, and she is with the Murray Brothers Funeral Home, which is based in Atlanta. Crazy to think that y'all are celebrating your 40th year of business.
Yes.
Oh, my
September
gosh.
This year.
That's amazing. That's definitely amazing. But I'm grateful that you're here, Allie, and I know death is a tough topic, but certainly nobody can avoid it.
Definitely.
There's not a person, not a family that can avoid it.
Not at all.
But one thing that I have learned is most of us have no idea what to do when we have a loved one that passes away.
Right.
So I want to make sure that we're going to navigate people today through the process and get everyone's questions answered. Okay, well, we're going to jump right in.
All right.
So for people who have never had the experience of being in charge when they have a loved one that passes away, what are the initial steps? Like, what's on the checklist or the to-do list?
So, of course, your checklist will just start off with your basic as far as if you're looking at cremation or burial. And, of course, it will elaborate into the type of service that you're wishing to have and the items that are needed. So, of course, finding out first how you're going to finance this particular service,
right.
If it's out of pocket, if you have insurance available. Unfortunately, there are no payment plans when it comes down to funeral service.
Okay, good
so
to
most
know.
of the time, that's one of the first things that will be spoken about,
right.
Along with the wishes, if the deceased person had any wishes, and if the family is going to carry out those wishes. You'll continue to proceed into when and where you want those services. And, of course, your funeral director walks you through that particular process of how to carry out everything, usually within 3 to 10 days.
Okay, so that's typically standard how long it takes,
Correct.
Okay, to get a funeral ready. And so what are some of the costs of funerals? So I guess it can vary based on how elaborate, because clearly some can be very small, modest, but I've been to a couple elaborate services before. But what are some of the common costs?
Your common cost is your professional fees of your funeral director and staff, which is usually a non-declinable cost. And then, of course, the removal from the initial place of passing, any preparation costs, any use of facility costs, and then, of course, you have the casket. People assume that's where bulk of the monies come and go in the funeral industry.
Right.
It all just depends on what you prefer as a family.
What type of service? Okay.
Right. So then you have your vault costs as well.
Okay. And so for people who are maybe on a budget or maybe it's just beliefs, they're considering cremation. Mm-hmm. So obviously you can have a service, though, and still be cremated, though, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
This is something that is very new as far as a traditional funeral service with cremation to follow. You go through the entire process of embalming, dressing, casketing, having a funeral, and the only difference is you don't go to the cemetery.
You're not going to the cemetery. And so what are some of the expenses that surprise people? Because I have been in charge, I think now maybe 4 or 5 times. And I'm like, why is this expensive? Especially I've buried a couple people in Los Angeles. Like, y'all have got to be kidding me. Well, what are some of the costs that surprise folks?
Some of the costs that surprises people this day and time, I guess, are your add-ons, how much flowers can cost, how much programs can cost. They have, with it being 2021, you have now PPE costs added into your funeral expenses because, of course, you have to protect the environment of the funeral home and the staff.
Okay.
Your cemetery costs.
Right.
So these are things that are surprising families at this time.
Yeah, I know. I think that's one thing that surprised me, having to pay the cost at the cemetery, having the vault opened and closed. I think we paid almost $2,000 just to have that done in LA.
Correct.
Yeah. So I know this can be an issue. Who legally has the right to engage you all after somebody has passed away? I'm sure y'all have had some drama with that situation.
Definitely.
Right.
It can get very sticky in this situation. It's the legal next of kin. And the legal next of kin, if you're married, of course, it's your spouse. If you're underage, it's one of the parents.
Okay.
And, of course, if you're of age, not married, no parents, no children, adult children,
Right.
then it's your siblings.
Okay.
This can become a problem in some situations. And, of course, if you don't have any of those, then you're winding up with cousins, nieces, and nephews. And it can get very confusing, a lot of tension, a lot of frustration.
Right.
But you try to work through each situation with the families. I definitely encourage people to have paperwork in place.
Right.
Especially if you don't have that next of kin close to you.
I was getting ready to say, without a will giving really clear direction, that has got to be a very complicated situation.
Yes.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, it winds up to who has the money to take care of this.
Who's going to pay? Yeah.
Correct.
He who writes the check is in charge.
Yes.
Right. For sure. So let's help people get ready to come to the funeral home. What research do you recommend that folks do before they actually contact you guys or make an appointment to come in?
So, of course, if you're affiliated with a church, most churches will have an affiliation with a funeral home. They may be able to lean you towards that particular firm to assist you.
Okay.
And, of course, you have the internet this day and time. So definitely do your research. Google, Yelp, you have all of these places where you're able to have reviews and find out some of the things that will assist you to let you know this is a good firm for you all to visit. Never feel obligated to go with that firm. You can walk in, speak with someone,
Okay.
and you don't have to choose that particular firm.
Okay.
Definitely weigh your options. So if you need to visit 2 or 3, perfectly okay.
Okay. Is that normal for people to do?
Occasionally.
Okay.
Especially if they're new to an area.
Okay.
And this is their first time doing this. They're not familiar with the process.
So that's not you. Okay. And so what questions do you suggest people ask when they're at the funeral home?
To definitely make sure that this funeral home is able to carry out their wishes. If it's something, let's say they want to have a viewing, but not a funeral service, and then cremate, to be able to have their wishes honored and not be forced into something that they do not want. And that's where people start to regret the funeral homes, when they're being forced to have certain type of services and items added to their contract.
Okay. And let's talk about how to vet a funeral home, because, I think a lot of us culturally, when you live in the same area that you grow up, you already know like maybe the 1 or 2 places that you're going to go.
Correct.
But again, if you're in a new area, how do you know that you're at a good place? Is it some sort of rating system?
The only rating system that you would have are your ratings on Google and Yelp.
Okay. And I'm sure probably getting recommendations from people that you know is really
in your
important
neighborhood,
too.
correct.
Okay. And what should people be bringing? So I've had the unfortunate loss. Someone in my family has passed away. When I come to have an appointment with you, is there any certain paperwork that I need to bring? How do I prepare myself?
So, of course, we always send out a checklist. This checklist talks about the vital statistic information, where you were born, social security number, parents' names, things of that nature.
Okay.
So that we can start getting the documents processed.
Okay.
That's what you're initially going to talk about at that first meeting. And, of course, what type of services that you're seeking.
And for people who haven't had the experience, for all that vital statistics information, you all are gathering that for the death certificate, correct?
Correct.
Because you all order those.
Yes.
Gotcha.
We have to send it over to a doctor to list the cause of death, get it approved by the county. The state has to then approve it and release those copies to us.
Okay. And then the death certificate, though, we also need that for the life insurance, any other expenses, accounts, things that people need to take care of as related to the business. I always suggest that people order at least maybe 3 to 5 of them.
Correct.
You want to have several of them because some creditors actually want originals, and you may have to give those up to somebody.
Definitely.
So you definitely want to order. Any other tips like that you can think about that people just don't think about when they're under stress or duress?
Always make sure you at least have one on file somewhere. You can get it in your hand real quick.
Okay.
Should something come up in the future.
Okay. And so for folks who are on a tight budget, maybe they don't have life insurance. Maybe they did not plan for this life event. What suggestions do you all typically make for families?
So, of course, you do run into situations where you have to make concessions for people to stay within their budget.
Right.
And, of course, I will refer another funeral home to you if I am not able to assist you. So you do have certain programs within the counties. They call it indigent burial.
Okay.
This is not a pretty sight. It is acceptable.
Right.
So a lot of families have to go that route.
When they can't afford it.
Yes.
So give us an idea on average. An average cremation costs about what now?
$1,600.
$1,600. Okay.
Yes.
And then on average, a funeral. I know maybe people have limousines, maybe they don't, but on an average.
So your starting point would be about $5,500.
Okay.
You can go up to $20,000, $30,000.
Y'all have done a $30,000 funeral?
Yes.
Okay. Oh my God. We'll have to talk about that later.
Okay.
We'll talk about that later. So what are some common mistakes that you all see families make?
Rushing. Listening to too many people.
Okay.
If you're preparing for your loved one,
right,
go with your gut and your instinct, not what people on the outside are saying you should or should not do.
Okay. And then one thing that I had to learn going through the process, how important it is to bring the right people with you.
Yes.
To the funeral home. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
So, of course, in bringing the right people with you to the funeral home, people always are under the assumption that the funeral home is going to rob you blind. Right. So, of course, you have certain people, oh, no, don't get this, you don't need that. You do need this, you don't need that, and they'll try to take shortcuts. So artificial flowers versus real flowers. Okay. Regular copy paper for a program versus some decent cardstock. Right. We can do that. We can do that. You don't need this. You don't need that. So you have to be mindful of those people who may be in your ear. I would call them the naysayers, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Right. And it's probably important, too, to have the right person for the right emotional support as well.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. You don't and if this person doesn't support you, don't bring them to the funeral home.
But you just made me think about something. For people who do need to save money, you talked about them, maybe picking cheaper flowers. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're going with a cheaper stock of paper. Are there any other tips that you can have for folks who are on a tight budget that they can consider so they can maybe save some money but still maybe have the beautiful service that they want?
Of course, definitely. Explaining to people that, burial, if you're not a family or a person who visits a cemetery. Right. Keep in mind that you still can do that traditional funeral service and then do the cremation. Okay. And you have your loved one to take home with you. Okay. So I always let people know, don't get caught up into that cemetery if that's not something you can afford. Okay. Cremation is respectable. Right. It is dignified. Okay. And it can be classy. Right. So, of course, there's nothing wrong with that. But I do know some people just don't believe in that particular method of disposition.
Okay. Any other advice for first-time folks who have never, again, been in charge when it comes to making these decisions?
Just go with your gut instinct, your heart. Stick true to your guns when you walk into the funeral home.
Right. The only other thing that I'm going to suggest is please know your budget.
Definitely.
Yeah. You have to know your budget. How are you going to be able to pay for this? Yes. And one thing that you taught me is how much you spend is not an indication of how much you love somebody.
Exactly.
So that's really important, too, that you're factoring that in when you're making your decisions.
Yes, okay. Because I remind people that your loved one has gone on. This is a mere shell.
Right. Yes. Right. And the rest of us have to keep living, and we need some money to keep living,
exactly.
too. Yeah, yes. That's for sure.
Definitely.
So that's for sure. Well, Allie, thank you so much for coming.
No problem.
Yep, I appreciate you. So thank you all for joining us for Thank Me Later and for our series, our real life series. This one, again, really important, all about death and how to properly put our families away. And please continue to follow us at TML Money on Instagram, and me personally at Janai Thornton. And thank you so much for being part of the Thank Me Later community.